When he goes quiet, it's tempting to assume he's over it, that he's done, that the silence means he's moved on, without a second thought. But silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it's a tool, a mask, and other times it's a test. Not for you, but for him. You see, when someone is truly over you, they don't need silence to process. They've made peace. They're not watching to see if you notice the distant. But when someone still feels something, when they're still emotionally connected, silence becomes a kind of power play, a subtle way to regain control or to create space that they hope you will cross first. Think about it. If someone had really moved on, they wouldn't need to disappear to prove it. They'd be genuinely indifferent, not strategically distant. But silence that feels calculated, that's not peace. That's someone trying to reset the emotional playing field. There's a particular kind of silence that comes not from closure, but from conflict, internal conflict. A person can be battling within themselves, trying to convince themselves they don't care, while their thoughts are still circling back to you. And that's the tricky thing about emotional attachment. It doesn't always come out as direct communication. In fact, when someone is emotionally attached, they often don't say it. They go quiet, hoping the quiet will say it for them, or hoping it will protect them from the vulnerability they don't want to show. But here's the catch. That very silence becomes a mirror, not for you, but for them. When the conversations stop and the attention fades, the echo chamber of their own mind starts to amplify everything they tried to ignore. Memories, regrets, the tension between who they pretend to be and what they actually feel. I've seen it so many times. A guy walks away, acting like he's fine. He doesn't check in. Maybe he even starts dating someone else. But deep down, his emotional attachment hasn't gone anywhere. He's just trying to suffocate it with distractions, or pride, or a fear of what happens if he admits he still cares. So he fakes detachment. He performs this moving on act, but that performance crumbles when he's alone. When the noise dies down and no one is watching, that's when it hits him. Silence, in that moment, is no longer power, it becomes exposure, because he's left with only his thoughts. And if those thoughts keep bringing him back to you, then no amount of pretending can drown that out. That's the thing about emotional connections. They don't just disappear because someone stops talking. Real emotional ties outlive contact. They show up in the space between messages, in the reaction he has when he sees your name, in the way he hesitates before reaching out, not because he doesn't want to, but because he does, and he doesn't know how to anymore. So when you're on the receiving end of that silence, don't rush to fill it. Don't chase after an answer, because the truth is, if someone is truly done, their actions speak clearly. But when someone is silent and still watching, still reacting, still lingering, that's not closure, that's confusion. That's someone wrestling with the emotions they don't know how to handle or express. What often happens next is a delayed reappearance. They resurface, sometimes weeks, sometimes months later, with a casual message. Hey, have you been? Or a memory from the past. And you might wonder, why now? But that moment didn't come from nowhere. It came from all the noise they sat with in your absence. The silence didn't clear their feelings, it clarified them. So the question isn't just whether he's silent. The real question is, what is that silence protecting? If it's peace, you'll know. But if it's pride, fear, or longing, you'll feel that too. Because silence, when someone is still emotionally attached, is never truly quiet. It's full of tension, full of what's unsaid, and full of the emotions he's trying not to admit, even to himself. So, don't be fooled by the act. The real test of emotional detachment isn't in the silence itself. It's in what that silence reveals. He may pose, smile, and act unbothered, but the need to appear over you is often a sign he's not. See, emotional attachment doesn't disappear overnight. It doesn't have an off switch. What often happens is that it goes underground, tucked away beneath ego, pride, and the desperate need to look strong. It's not that he doesn't feel anything anymore. It's that he's terrified of looking like he does. Let's be honest, moving on has become a performance in the modern world. We've trained ourselves to equate silence and detachment with strength. We reward the one who looks the least affected, the person who posts first, who goes out first, who shows the world how free they are. They're seen as the winner. But here's the truth. When someone rushes to prove they're over you, they're often just trying to convince themselves. Hence, someone truly lets go. They don't need to showcase their independence. They live it quietly. They feel peace. They feel clarity. But when he's still emotionally attached, that silence isn't peace, it's pressure. It's a tug of war between the image he wants to present and the feelings he's trying to suppress. And in that war, ego usually becomes his shield. He might be silent, but it's not because he doesn't care. It's because speaking, admitting he's still affected, makes him vulnerable. And vulnerability for many men feels like weakness. So instead, he chooses the path that protects his pride. That means no contact. That means acting as if nothing ever touched him deeply. But that doesn't mean he's healed. It means he's hiding. In fact, the more effort someone puts into seeming unbothered, the more likely it is that they are bothered. You don't run from something that doesn't matter to you. You don't try to prove anything about something that's truly over in your heart. And that's the trap of emotional performance. It looks like freedom, but it's often just resistance. Here's where it gets interesting. That resistance shows up in ways that feel confusing to you. You start asking yourself, if he doesn't care, why is he watching my stories? Why does he still ask our mutual friends about me? Why does he get weirdly distant and cold when I look happy? Because he's not detached. He's just desperate not to show that he's still attached. That emotional tether is still there, pulling in quiet ways. But instead of facing that pull, instead of owning that there's still an emotional tie, he doubles down on silence. He tells himself that silence is power. But if he says nothing, feels nothing, reacts to nothing, he wins. And in that game, ego feeds him. Because ego hates discomfort. Ego tells him, you don't need her. You're above this. Stay quiet. Stay cool. But underneath, ego lives emotion. And emotion doesn't care about your pride. It sneaks up on you at night. It reminds you of the good moments. It catches you off guard when you smell her perfume on someone else or hear that song on the radio, and then it stings. Because that silence he chose, it didn't stop the memories from playing. It didn't delete the attachment. It just buried it under layers of denial. That's why the silence becomes so loud, because he's not expressing anything. He's not releasing it. He's just pushing it down. And eventually what we suppress always resurfaces. It shows up in short temper, in emotional unavailability, in rebound connections that don't feel right. It shows up when he realizes he's with someone new, but still comparing her to you. That's not peace. That's residue. And here's the thing you need to hear. His silence is not a reflection of your worth. It's not confirmation that he didn't care. It's not proof that it meant nothing to him. It's just the way he's managing his discomfort, his fear of vulnerability, his internal war between pride and emotion. And if you keep interpreting his silence as detachment, you'll miss the truth. The truth is, he's faking it, not to hurt you, not to play games, because he doesn't know how to be both affected and honest at the same time. And you're in the middle of that silence, wondering if it ever mattered. You're reading into the absence of words as if that's the final story. But it's not. It's just the part he doesn't have the courage to write out loud. Sometimes silence isn't peace. It's fear in disguise. The real breakup doesn't always happen the moment someone says it's over. We often assume that the end of a relationship is marked by the last conversation, the final argument, or the moment one person walks away. But the truth is, for a lot of people, especially men, the emotional severing doesn't happen at the goodbye. It begins when the attention stops. That's when reality really starts to settle in. See, in the immediate aftermath of a breakup, especially one where he's the one who left, there's this illusion of freedom. He might feel a sense of relief, like he's finally free from the pressure or the emotional intensity of the relationship. He may even convince himself that this was the right decision. So he goes out, maybe posts some pictures, hangs out with friends, but that's the surface, that's the noise. And that noise is comforting because it fills the silence. It keeps the mind from drifting to the uncomfortable space of reflection. In those first few days or even weeks, it's easy to distract yourself. It's easy to scroll, swipe, party, or work endlessly. But the moment your attention stops, the moment you go quiet, stop reacting, stop checking in, stop being emotionally available in even the smallest ways, that's when something shifts. Because up until that point, part of him still feels connected. Even if you haven't spoken directly, your energy might still be in his world. Maybe he's watching your stories, waiting for a post that suggests you're missing him. Maybe he checks to see if you've seen his. Maybe he's silently hoping for that one message, even if he never admits it. That invisible string is still there, still tying him to you, because your attention, even in small doses, tells him, I still see you, I still care. But when that goes away, when the line goes dead, and there's no more signal, that's when the emotional truth hits. That's when the fantasy starts to fade, and he's left with nothing but the silence and whatever's still unresolved in him. And that's the hardest part. Because now there's no one reflecting him back to himself, no one validating his choices, no one reacting to his moves. There's no audience for the version of him he's trying to portray. And suddenly, those pictures he posts don't hit the same. The nights out feel emptier. The distractions lose their power. You see, emotional attachment doesn't need presence, it needs impact. And when your absence begins to speak louder than any words you ever said, that's when he realizes you're no longer orbiting his world. You're not just gone physically, you're gone emotionally. You've stopped feeding the illusion that he still has some kind of grip on you. And let's be honest, that's when the regret creeps in. That's when he starts wondering what he really lost. Because it's easy to feel in control when someone still gives you even a little piece of their heart. But when they take it all back, that's when you feel the emptiness. He may not text you, he may not call, he might not even admit it to himself fully. But deep down, he's going to feel that shift. And that shift is powerful. It tells him that the door isn't just closed, it's locked. And you're not standing behind it anymore. It's in the silence that he's forced to confront what he's actually feeling. And sometimes what he finds is confusion. Sometimes it's sadness. Sometimes it's fear. Fear that he made the wrong choice. Fear that you're actually gone, that someone else might see your worth more clearly than he did. That's why I always say, don't rush to fill the silence. Don't chase closure. Don't try to prove your value, because when you pull back fully, cleanly, without bitterness, but with strength, you let the silence do what your words never could. You show that you're not waiting, you're not holding space for someone who's undecided, you're moving. And your movement, your actual evolution away from the relationship is what starts the real breakup in his heart. It's in that moment that the comfort of knowing you're still there begins to slip away. And sometimes that's when he'll come back around. But by then, you'll have changed. You won't be in the same emotional place. You'll have rebuilt parts of yourself that no longer fit with who he was in your life. That's why the most powerful thing you can do after someone walks away is to let the silence speak. Because in that silence, he won't just hear the echo of your absence. He'll feel the weight of what he let go. And that's when he realizes the real breakup didn't happen when he said goodbye. It happened when you stopped looking back. When you cut off contact with someone, when you stop calling, stop texting, stop checking in, you create silence. And for a lot of people, silence feels like the end, like it's done, finished, that's it. But what they don't understand is that silence isn't just emptiness. Silence echoes, and that echo over time can be deafening. You see, when someone is emotionally attached to you, even if they're pretending they've moved on, even if they're going out, living their life, dating other people, that silence doesn't sit quietly in the background. It starts to stir things up. At first, they might feel relief, space, maybe even power. But slowly, silence starts to do its work, because without the constant reassurance of your presence, your messages, your voice, your little check-ins, they're left alone with their thoughts. And that's when it gets real. When you stop giving someone your energy, you force them to confront the reality of losing you. Not the fantasy of being strong and over it, but the actual lived experience of what it means when you're no longer there. And here's what happens. The mind begins to talk. It starts running through scenarios. Is she thinking about me? Did she really move on? Was she really that happy with me? Or did I imagine it? The silence you leave behind becomes fertile ground for overthinking, doubt, and nostalgia. And this is where emotional attachment exposes itself. Because if he was truly done, if he was genuinely free of that emotional bond, then the silence wouldn't matter. It would feel neutral. But if he's still tied to you emotionally, if he's still carrying unspoken feelings, unresolved regrets, unhealed wounds, then the silence becomes unbearable. It becomes a mirror, reflecting everything he's trying to avoid. It's easy for someone to fake moving on when there's still communication, when you're still accessible, when they can still look at your stories, reply to a text, get some form of validation from you, even if it's subtle. But when that disappears, they can't mask their detachment anymore, because now they don't get to know how you're doing. They can't control how you remember them. They're locked out of your world, and that unknown is where the anxiety lives. This is why silence is so powerful, because it forces emotional honesty, not from you, from them. It's no longer about what you're saying or doing to keep them connected. It's about what they feel when you do nothing. That's the moment you start to see the truth. There's a difference between letting go and just trying to suppress your feelings. So many people act like they've moved on by staying busy, surrounding themselves with distractions, maybe even dating again. But if those emotions haven't been processed, if there's still an emotional debt left unpaid, silence will expose. Because when everything goes quiet, when the distractions aren't there, when no one's feeding their ego, that attachment starts to whisper. Sometimes it shouts. This is why you might suddenly hear from someone weeks or months after you go silent. They'll tell themselves they're just checking in, being polite, or that they randomly thought of you. But that's not random. That's silence doing its work. That's the emotional attachment pulling at them, demanding closure, clarity, or another shot. The hardest part for you is staying in that silence, because silence is uncomfortable for the person who's attached, but it can be uncomfortable for you too, especially if you're someone who wants peace or closure or still cares on some level. But when you hold that silence, you give them space to confront what they've been avoiding. And that confrontation, that's where growth happens. That's where truth is revealed. It doesn't mean they'll come back. It doesn't mean they'll say everything you wish they would say, but it does mean that what's real, not what's performed or projected, finally starts to surface. Silence, in a way, removes the performance. It strips away the drama, the words, the pretending, and what's left is whatever was actually there beneath it all. So if someone walked away from you or claimed they were over it or tried to act like it didn't matter, don't rush to prove anything. Don't chase. Don't fill the void with words. Let silence be your strength. Because if there was something real there, some genuine emotional connection, it won't vanish in quiet. It will get louder. The longer you say nothing, the more their mind will try to fill in the blanks. And that's when you'll see what was real and what was just noise. The silence doesn't just end conversations. Sometimes it begins the real one. He may not reach out, but that doesn't mean he's let go. Silence can be self-protection, not peace. And this is where a lot of people get confused, especially when they're trying to make sense of someone else's silence after a breakup. They assume if he hasn't called, if he hasn't messaged, if he hasn't tried to get me back, then clearly he doesn't care anymore. Clearly he's moved on. But that's not how it works. Emotional attachment isn't always loud. Sometimes it goes quiet. Sometimes it withdraws, not because it's gone, but because pride won the battle over vulnerability. See, most men aren't taught how to process emotional pain openly. They're taught how to mask it, push it down, and maintain control. So when a breakup happens, especially one that hits them harder than they expected, they don't always react with authenticity. They react with strategy. And that strategy is often disappear, go silent, pretend they don't care. Why? Because it feels safer to appear detached than to be honest about still being emotionally invested. Pride says, don't reach out first. Pride says, she needs to wonder about me, not the other way round. But underneath that performance, there's still attachment. This is why you'll notice some men go completely radio silent, not because they've emotionally resolved the breakup, but because they're terrified of what reaching out would expose. It would reveal their lingering feelings. It would make them vulnerable to rejection. And most importantly, it would strip away the illusion of strength they're clinging to. Because in their mind, being the one who cares less is a position of power. So they choose silence, not because they're at peace, but because their pride won't let them show that they're still hurting. Now, here's the thing. A man who's truly moved on doesn't need to prove anything. He doesn't need to go quiet just to make a point. He doesn't need to avoid contact just to protect his ego. That's what people do when they're still emotionally entangled. When a man is still attached, silence becomes a game of control. It becomes a way to say, I'm still in this, but only on my terms. He wants you to think he's fine, but he's still checking your stories, still watching your posts, still wondering who you're with and whether you're thinking about him. That's not closure. That's attachment playing dress up as detachment. You might ask yourself, but if he still cares, why wouldn't he just say it? And that's the heartbreaking part. Sometimes the fear of being rejected again, of being seen as weak, of giving someone else the upper hand emotionally, it's too much for him to face. So rather than risk that exposure, he retreats. It's not because his feelings disappear. It's because his pride couldn't coexist with his vulnerability. He chooses silence, thinking it makes him strong. But deep down, that silence costs him more than he realizes. You have to understand, when someone is emotionally attached but not emotionally mature, silence becomes their coping mechanism. Not because they've healed, but because they don't know how to show up in the aftermath of something real. It's easier to suppress, to shut down, to distract themselves with attention from other people, or with noise, or with work, or with whatever gives the illusion of moving on, rather than actually facing the pain of what they lost. But here's where this matters for you. Don't measure his silence as proof that you meant nothing. Don't assume that his lack of effort is a reflection of your worth. It's not. His silence may be loud, but it's not always honest. It may protect his ego, but it doesn't mean he's found peace. It doesn't mean he's truly let go. And most importantly, it doesn't mean he's stronger than you, because you, the one who's willing to face the pain, who's brave enough to process it, to talk about it, to feel it fully, you're the strong one. You're the one who's actually healing. And that might not be glamorous. It might not look like power, but it is power, because you're not hiding behind silence. You're not pretending. You're doing the real work. So if you're tempted to break your silence just to see if he'll respond, pause. If you're tempted to chase after some kind of validation, ask yourself, are you really seeking answers? Or are you trying to soothe your ego in the same way he is? Because truthfully, if someone can't meet you with the same emotional courage and honesty you bring to the table, then what are you actually fighting to hold on to? Sometimes silence is a wall. Sometimes it's a mirror. And sometimes it's a confession that pride is louder than love. Let him keep his silence. It says more than his words ever could. If he's truly moved on, he won't feel the need to prove it. That's the thing most people miss when they're obsessing over what their ex is posting, who they're seen with, or how fast they seem to have healed. We start studying their every move like it's some coded message about their emotional state. But the truth is much simpler. When someone is really over you, genuinely at peace, genuinely healed, they aren't trying to show you anything. They're just living quietly, calmly, without performance. But if he's doing the opposite, if he's trying to show you he's thriving, if he's showcasing his nights out, laughing with new people, uploading the gym selfies or sending cryptic quotes to his story, that's not peace, that's noise. That's an emotional residue trying to distract itself. It's performance art for an audience of one, you. Because real healing doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to be broadcast. It just is. People fake moving on all the time. They jump into situationships. They use others as emotional bandages. They push themselves to look happier, more successful, more independent than they actually feel. But underneath that curated version of strength is often a quiet panic, a fear of facing the stillness. And why? Because silence, real silence, exposes what you're still holding on to. In silence, there's no one to impress, no one to convince. And that's when the truth creeps in. That's when you realize how much someone meant to you. That's when you realize you're not actually over it, you're just avoiding it. So when a guy's silence is truly rooted in peace, you won't feel him trying to pull your attention back. He won't be indirectly messaging you through his feed or sending mixed signals. There won't be an agenda behind his distance. He'll just be gone. Not in a cold way, but in a resolved way. Because once someone has genuinely let go, they no longer feel compelled to be seen by the person they used to need. But when that emotional attachment is still there, silence becomes loud. His silence may seem calm on the outside, but internally, he's checking for signs. Is she still watching? Is she doing better without me? Does she care that I haven't reached out? That's not peace. That's emotional tension disguised as indifference. It's a quiet cry for relevance. So if you're sitting there wondering, if he's over me, why is he acting like this? Or why does he keep popping up just when I'm starting to feel okay again? That's your answer. Because he's not over it. He's not over you. His silence isn't clean, it's calculated, it's reactive, it's full of noise, even if it's not spoken. True detachment is quiet because there's no unfinished business left to scream. It doesn't need an audience because there's no longer a play being performed. So if someone really has moved on, they won't need to stage their life to show you how far they've come. They'll just go, and you'll stop feeling their pull. Not because they're being avoidant or manipulative, but because they've really accepted the ending. That's why when a man stops needing to prove something, when he doesn't need to be seen anymore, it's actually the most honest sign he's let go. Because people who are free don't try to show you they're free. They just live. And that ironically, is when you truly stop being a character in their story. So don't be fooled by silence alone. Look at what that silence contains. Is it still filled with noise? Still begging to be noticed, even subtly? Or is it a genuine release? Because only one of those is true peace. The other is just a performance waiting for a reaction. And if you're the one watching it all unfold, don't let yourself get pulled into the show. Let them perform if they need to, but don't mistake that for power. The real strength lies in your silence.